Madeline, if you'll send us to the next slide. We do have a great panel for you guys today, which we're really excited about. And I'm going to introduce them in just a few minutes after we do a little intro. But I wanted to introduce Step Up Texas, which is who we are with and who's hosting the webinar today. Step Up Texas is a new program that's funded by the Department of Justice. And what we do is we train on trauma-informed care and restorative justice. Today, we're only focusing on trauma-informed care. The purpose of the grant is to improve juvenile justice outcomes. And so that's kind of the big picture that we are working with, but we're doing that through trauma-informed care training. So next up, I will introduce myself a little bit and also Madeline. We are both with Step Up Texas. My background is in counseling and social work, and then I have spent the last 20 years in different roles working with kids and families that come from backgrounds of trauma. So my role specifically is working with law enforcement throughout the state of Texas. So we are really grateful for all of you that could join us today. And then also I am in the process of getting our training certified with TCOL. So that will be a resource for officers that we can be in touch about. Madeline is on here today as well. She is running our tech and all things behind the scenes, which we are super grateful for people that do that well. Madeline is a student right now, and she'll receive her master's in marriage and family therapy in May. So we're really grateful for her as well. Just a few housekeeping items. We would love to see you. So if you're comfortable turning your camera on and you're not, driving or doing anything super distracting, we would love to see you if you're comfortable with that. As far as the settings, if you click on View at the top of your screen, and then click Speaker, that's probably the best way for you to see the PowerPoint and then also our panelists as they share today. If you will ask questions in the chat as you have them, you can ask them anytime throughout the presentation. And then Madeline will be tracking those for us, and we'll have a question and answer time at the end to summarize those. So don't feel like you're distracting or anything if you ask a question in the chat as we're talking. Like I said earlier, the webinar is being recorded, so we'll have access to that. And since we have a big group and we probably can't go around and introduce you all individually, Madeline is going to have a poll that should pop up on your screen. And we would love for you to just tell us real briefly your name, what county you're from, and what your job title is. And then we should be able to see those responses as they come up. So as the names and counties and everything are popping up, I do have to give a quick shout out to two of our Step Up professionals, Allison Tipton and Elizabeth Castillo, because I believe that we have the most people in attendance from Swisher, Castro, and the whole Panhandle area. So good job to you guys for spreading the word. And then I know we have several from Bexar County as well. And I know Holly Pompa did a great job of connecting you guys. All right, so we will hop in. I'm going to give just a 5-minute overview on trauma-informed care before we hand it over to our panelists. And so just in case, you're not familiar with trauma-informed care, the definition of trauma-informed care is really broad, and that's on purpose because it encompasses a wide range of topics and ideas. but basically it starts from a place of trying to understand the pervasive nature of trauma and promoting environments of healing rather than environments that re-traumatize. And so we'll break that down a little bit as we go, but that's kind of the broad definition of what trauma-informed care is. As far as some of the principles with trauma-informed care, so these are defined by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. We won't go into all of these in detail, but one thing that's important to realize is that trauma-informed care ideally would be implemented throughout all levels of your organization or your department. So it would be from the leadership, how they interact with the staff, with employees, with people that you serve. So really, it's a type of care that is good for everybody. We don't have to know someone's trauma. We don't have to know that they come from trauma in order to use these principles. So it applies to parenting, it applies to work, it really applies to everything that we do. And it just kind of helps us break down some of these concepts into daily practices. A good way to start just practically understanding trauma-informed care is to talk about ACE scores. And so ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And so this comes from a study by Kaiser Permanente in the 90s, where they surveyed 17,000 people, and they were assessing for 10 different childhood experiences. And so those fall under areas of abuse, neglect, and also household issues. And so basically what they did was they surveyed these people, and so everyone has a score, has an ACE score basically of 0 to 10. And so what they found was that 2/3 of the people surveyed had at least one ACE score, but from those 2/3 that had one, 87% of those people had more than one ACE score. And so this is just something to keep in mind as we move forward. And this only applies to ACEs that occur in the household. This doesn't even address ACEs that can occur in our community or in our environments. And one thing that they found also from this study and from other studies that have been done since then is the impacts of ACE scores. So on the next slide, it will show just basically the higher your ACE score, the more at risk you are of health and of mental health and physical health issues. So if you look at, someone that has 4 or more ACEs, those statistics, they would be 7 times more likely to be an alcoholic, and they would have an increase in attempted suicide by 1,200%. And if you go all the way up to 6 or more ACEs, we see the risk of someone's lifespan being shortened by 20 years. So this study was really revolutionary, and several studies have been done since that just prove the traumas that we go through, especially as children, have a lasting impact on our physical and mental health. And just to break that down a little bit more, on the next slide, it will show the effects of toxic stress on the brain. And so when we think about kids and their brain development, trauma has been proven to have a negative impact on the brain. So when we look at the prefrontal cortex, that's the part of the brain where we have our thinking and our reasoning. And then our amygdala is our fear center. That's kind of the survival part of our brain. And so what they found in studies of kids that come from trauma is that the survival part of their brain is in hyperactive mode and is on high alert all the time. Whereas their prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking, reasoning part of the brain, is harder for them to access. And so those neurons are not as connected as a kiddo that has not grown up with a toxic stress. So, an example of this might be for people that work with juveniles and have been in stressful situations with them. You might see a very quick fight, flight, or freeze response in them. That response comes directly from the amygdala. And so kids that that have come from a background of trauma, you're going to see that response kick in a lot quicker with a little less of the reasoning and logic in those moments of stress. Okay, I want to end this part with just some good news and some hope and the reason why we care about this type of work. And that is something called the PACEs, which are the 7 positive childhood experiences. And so the research has shown that there are 7 things that basically combat the negative impact of trauma in a kiddo's life. And so if you look at all of these, a lot of them relate to family or mentor type roles. But what we want to talk about today is how people involved in law enforcement can have these types of positive impact on kids and adults and really anyone from trauma. And so I think he might be on here today. I have to give Chief Reynolds, our police chief here in Temple, a shout out. On the next slide, it shows a couple of pictures of him. And just to give a quick example of a way that he has made kids in our community feel safe and protected. So him and a school resource officer that a lot of these kiddos know showed up one night at our organization's event because there had been 2 gang shootings in the neighborhood within the past week. And so these kiddos would walk to our location and have dinner with us every Wednesday night. Well, several of them didn't feel safe walking because of everything that had been going on. And Chief Reynolds and his school resource officer offered to come out to just spend some time with the kids and also to say, hey, we're here just to keep you safe and to make you feel protected tonight. And that went a really long way with these kiddos. So just have to give Chief Reynolds a shout out. With that, we are going to introduce our panelists. They have very long bios that we will not read, but what I thought we would do is just let them each take a minute to introduce themselves. So we have Dr. Profilet, Agent Kaiser, and Deputy Deaver. And they have told me to call them by their names for the remainder of this webinar. So Sue, Randy, and Theo. Sue, if you want to start by introducing yourself, I will hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Thanks for having us. So my background is in developmental psychology. I got my PhD from the University of Illinois in educational psychology. And then my background has been in teaching and research. I taught at Texas Tech University in the Department of Human Development and Family Studies. I taught at Lamar University in psychology. And then more recently, I have had a job at Fort Bend County Behavioral Health Services, which is a department of the government in Fort Bend County. And it's great that we have a department that talks about behavior and mental health. And so my job is to do visit coaching, which I have a playroom behind me. If you see, there's like a two-way mirror behind me. It looks like a TV set, and behind me is a playroom. And so when parents have children who are in CPS custody, they can have their visitations here. And so we build the relationship between the parents and their children. So instead of having their visits at the CPS office, if they're planning to reunify the family, we build the relationship between the parents and their children. So I became a TBRI practitioner. That stands for trust-based relational intervention. And that's a form of trauma-informed care that I've been using with the families where the children have been abused or neglected.
All right, Randy.
Hello, everyone. And that is a fantastic story, again, by Chief Reynolds. I think that's really awesome because that's what it's really all about. My name is Randy Kaiser. I am an investigator with the state police here in Texas, DPS. I primarily investigate human trafficking as well as crimes against children. My educational background, I have a master's in exercise science, has nothing to do with law enforcement. And I'm also a hostage negotiator with DPS, as well as a TBRI practitioner. As Sue mentioned, in 2021, I completed that I've been working with Dr. Cross and the Karen Purvis Institute with TCU in developing a specialized law enforcement training centered around trauma. And we're still in our pilot phase of working that. We've given that at a few locations, and we're trying to push that out, hopefully in 2024, if all goes well, and have that widely available through the Karen Purvis Institute there at TCU. And I'm excited to be here to really talk about connection and how trauma-informed care, like really what it is and how we can apply this in law enforcement and be effective.
Thanks, Randy. Theo, you want to introduce yourself?
Right. So I'm Theo Deaver. I've been in law enforcement 19 years. The last 9 of those years, I have worked for Fort Bend County Sheriff's Crisis Intervention Team. The last 2 years, from the behest of Eric Fagan, our sheriff, he's allowed me to work with Behavioral Health Department, where Dr. Profilet works. And I work on a grant from OJJDP, which is Focused Youth Grant. And so I travel to 885 square miles of our county, and I help youth in whatever way they need it, but it starts off in a mental health crisis or someone believes that they have a mental issue going on. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you, guys. I also wanted to say that our panelists told me that at some points I might have to cut them off because they're really passionate about this topic. So if I do that, I'm not being rude. I'm just doing what they requested. So anyway, our first question, Sue is going to answer, and she's going to spend a few minutes talking about just trauma-informed care and some of the myths and facts that go along with trauma-informed care. For those of you that have heard of it before, you might have preconceived notions about what it is. And so she's going to address that for us.
Thanks, Kim. And I think that Kim went over some of this a little bit right at the beginning, kind of quickly. So some of it might be a little repeat of what Kim said. But the first myth is that trauma is the same as mental illness. So we want to make sure that everybody's aware that trauma is different than mental illness. So the definition of mental illness is it's a condition that affects one's thoughts, feelings, behaviors, sometimes affects people's moods. So if you think about a mental illness, there's a lot of examples, right? Somebody that has bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia, major depression, those are mental illnesses. And so mental illnesses are caused by genetics, and they could be caused by the environment, which is a lot different than what trauma is. So trauma isn't a condition that somebody has. Trauma is an emotional response to something terrible that has happened. So examples of trauma could be a car accident. It could be being raped, surviving a natural disaster. There's a lot of different things that are traumatic to people, and it's how people respond to an event. So the event isn't the trauma, it's the person's response to that. It can cause people to have different emotions. They could immediately have some shock after a traumatic incident, flashbacks, nightmares, physical symptoms. And most adults have had trauma. I've read that 70% of adults have had some trauma in their life. And so it's a lot different than mental illness. The second myth is that trauma-informed care is for clinicians or therapists to use. And the fact is that anybody can use trauma-informed care. So I'm not a therapist. Deputy Deaver and Randy, none of us are therapists or counselors, although some people think that what we do is therapeutic. It's kind of like counseling, but it's not. So we don't have degrees in counseling. But if anybody gets trained in trauma-informed care, they can provide this type of service. So it's more about how we give the service rather than what service we give. So it's more about the ways that we provide information to people, the ways that we talk to people. That is what makes a trauma-informed care. And then just the third myth that's pretty short is that the myth would be that you have to know somebody's trauma history to be trauma-informed. And you don't have to know their background. You can use trauma-informed care just upon meeting somebody and really not knowing anything about them. And so it's kind of just a way of doing things. Even working with somebody that has not had trauma, you can still use trauma-informed care. So It always works with everybody. It's a nice thing to use with coworkers. We always laugh because Deputy Deaver talks about using it with his spouse and his mother-in-law. So definitely with children and clients that we see, but it works with everybody. So that's all.
Thank you, Sue. Our next question is for everybody. If you guys could just share a little bit about how you became involved with trauma-informed care and kind of what in that process made you realize the value of trauma-informed care. Randy, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, sounds good. So starting my world of investigations back in 2016, I was put into a human trafficking squad. And what I quickly realized when we started recovering young girls that had constant runaways or were constant runaways was that I really didn't have the tools needed to connect with these young kids. And I'll give you a real quick example. When I first started, the first girl we recovered, she was 13 years old. We picked her up off of Bissonnette down in Houston, and we were taking her to a facility, a CPS facility, to kind of house her overnight for safety and that. Well, when I went to interview her, which my squad had dealt with her in the past, they knew what I was heading into. They just kind of set me up a little bit. And so I thought I was Superman and saving this girl's life because I brought her out of trafficking, and man, she's going to be happy to see me and want to talk to me and tell me everything. And all she did was cuss me out and tell me how she hated me and she wanted nothing to do with me. And, I was not Superman. It was pretty deflating when you realize, man, I didn't really provide anything to this young girl that she probably couldn't have got on her own. And so I realized there was a big void in my practice as far as even law enforcement. Like, I did not know how to handle these situations and these kids that come from a very rough background. And so it was one of those things that I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what I was looking for. I knew I wasn't a healthcare professional. I'm like, do I go back to school and go get a degree? What do I do? Like, how do I help these young kids? Because, I have kids myself and I want these kids to be safe as well. And so it wasn't until 2020 I met Dr. Cross with the Karen Purvis Institute. We were looking at starting some training, trauma-informed training. And I met Dr. Cross. He interviewed me. He started telling me a little bit about TBRI because we were trying to figure out if this is going to work in law enforcement. And within that first hour, I realized this is what I was missing. These were the tools. It's nothing magic, but these were the tools that I was missing in order to effectively connect with these kids and make an impact. And the advantage I had was I was a negotiator as well. So I had some kind of skills centered around rapport building and making connection, but I didn't have enough skill. And so it was around 2020 when I realized that these are the tools I'm missing. And since 2020 and beyond, it has drastically changed how I interact with these young kids. I focus on the connection first before anything, in order to even get prosecution or to even help the long-term investigation. It's all about connecting first. And so that's kind of really what changed my mind over the last 3-4 years. And I've had a lot of success, not necessarily always prosecuting, but helping that young kid, right, and making a connection piece.
Thank you, Randy. Theo, you want to share?
I wanted Dr. Sue to go first. Ladies first.
Well, I can. Thank you. So I became a CASA volunteer, that stands for Court Appointed Special Advocate volunteer, in 2015. I had worked with Child Advocates, Inc. in Harris County prior to that, but then I wanted to become a volunteer to have a case of my own. So a CASA volunteer has one case to work on and make sure that the children are safe, that they're in a good placement. And so I had a case with 3 young children who were physically abused by their parents. And so they were living with their grandparents. And so I would go once a month to the grandparents' house and visit with the 3 children. And so as part of that, there was some extra training to do. As a volunteer, I watched a video, and it was YouTube, and it was just an introduction to TBRI. So I just looked up this YouTube video, and they started saying that, you know, all children can be healed from trauma. And I was a little skeptical because I thought, I don't know if all children can be healed from trauma. It sounds like it's an easy fix. And so I started watching that video, and then I started realizing that it's really based on research. And since I was a researcher before, I really bought into it based on attachment theory. And I studied parent-child attachment when I was in graduate school. Even when I was an undergraduate at Illinois, I had studied attachment. So I just knew how important that was. And so what we're doing is really building attachments, building the connections, like Randy said. Parenting styles, all that was really part of this. So then when I would go see the family with the children living with their grandparents, I would try to incorporate some of the things that I had even just learned from watching that video. So normally I would go, we'd play games with the kids. We would work on, you know, just talking to each other, making eye contact, with the grandparents being more playful. The grandmother was definitely more playful than the grandfather. He kind of would go back and, you know, hide in his bedroom while we were all there playing. But the grandmother would ask me a lot of questions. And so I was really trying to build the relationship between the grandparents and the kids. And since then, I've been using it at the work that I do here with visit coaching. And now we're training. We have a TBRI collaborative in Fort Bend County. So we have a group of professionals, including Deputy Deaver and a bunch of people that work at CASA here in Fort Bend County, and we train professionals on the use of TBRI in different professions, as well as training the parents too. So.
Okay, so I guess it's my turn. I usually like to follow up a little bit because I want to make sure I touch the parts that they didn't touch. But since this is how I became trauma informed, I got into the grant work. I was already doing mental health work for 7 years prior, and they said, hey, we want you to go to this training class. And in law enforcement, you know, hey, let's go to training class. I'll take all the training that you want because I gotta be out doing stuff in the streets. So I'm cool with that. So I'm in this training class, and it was not a training class that I'm used to. And I was like, this stuff is not gonna work. And it was TBRI caregiver. And I said, man, we don't have time for this. This is like somebody that has days and weeks and hours with kids. This not gonna work. This is some huggy stuff. And so I said, well, some of this stuff I kind of already do, but nah, this not gonna work because I have about 3 hours with kids. And so I have 3 kids of my own. So I took it home and I started doing it with my kids, doing it with my wife and my mother-in-law. And so they didn't know that I was using TBRI on them and using my trauma-informed information, my trauma-informed knowledge to break some barriers down and get them to do things that I wanted them to do in an easier way. So I said, this works. I guess I'll try this at work. Maybe I can get better at work. And so I started doing it with my coworkers. I started doing it with my bosses. They don't know. They don't know what the TBRI base model is. And so when I started to do it, I said, okay, man, this can work. So I just used my trauma-informed knowledge to infect everybody that I came across. And so not on a micro scale, but on a larger scale, because I was doing a little bit like in the trauma informed, in TBRI, you have to connect, empower, and then correct. And sometime in law enforcement, I just want to go straight to the correction. Like, hey, I don't have time for all of this. Correct. And then I'm gone. Let somebody else deal with all of the other parts, the empowering, connecting parts. But I know that I have the skill set to connect very quickly with people, and I just had to give the time for empowerment and me to allow myself to correct them more gently than what I was doing. So it works 100%. It's a big change in my life as far as stress, because in law enforcement, you get stressed out when people are not doing what you want them to do quickly. So I'm able to do that at a higher rate now.
I want to add
That's
something,
great.
Kim.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've trained with Theo and Sue a few times, and I've gotten to know Theo and Sue pretty well. And I want to just make sure it's clear. Like, me and Theo don't come from the huggy background. Like, Theo shared a lot of stories with us. Like, we are like the hardcore, like, disciplinarian, like. So this has changed both of us dramatically in the sense of our approach, not only to work, but our life in general. And so I just wanted to make sure that everyone on the call, because I've been in law enforcement a while, and I know it's a little like, we got to be tough on everybody and we got to kick everybody's butt. And that was our old school way of thinking. But this is so more efficient when you can actually get someone to do something without having to force them to do it. As Theo was saying, it makes so much of a difference for how many use of forces you have, to how many reports you have to write about getting in fights and things of that nature. And the other thing I want to say is, if it is a protective situation to where someone is going to harm or injure somebody, we're not saying use TBRI. Don't sit there and just try to talk somebody that has a gun in your face. Like, you're not going to sit there and try to connect to them necessarily. So we just want to make sure. But I just wanted to throw that out there because it's important that as we go through this and we try to educate and push this forward, that it's not really huggy. It's just teaching people how to connect.
Tools on the belt. Tools on the belt.
That's great. Yes, thank you guys. And I think that's a good point too, that it's not necessarily asking you to spend more time or extra time or not to do the job that you're called to do. It's just a different way of doing what you're already doing. Okay, so with that, let's dive into some more practical examples. And we'll let Randy and Theo answer this one. Can you guys give some examples that you have used in law enforcement, just to kind of break it down? Let's get a little more practical and hear from some examples.
I'll start off on this one. So we had a 15-year-old female that weighed about 230 pounds, maybe about 5'6". She was in a mental health crisis. She was threatening suicide, and she was physically harming herself. She was at our local mental health authority, and they were trying to extract her from a restroom that she barricaded herself in. And I got there about 45 minutes after everybody else arrived. So there were about 12 fire and EMS and law enforcement officers, 2 mental health clinicians, the mother of the daughter, and the caseworker, all out there, all trying to get this girl to get in the car. She is belly band, so she has a belt on with handcuffs that are attached to the belt. And they're trying to get her in the car. 4 officers are trying to get her in the car, and they're telling her, just get in the car, just get in the car. And it's not working for them. I arrived, I found out her name, I went to the car, and I started with playful engagement, which TBR teaches you about playful engagement. So she was kind of trying to hide her head away from me. And I said, oh, we playing hide and go seek. So we go back and forth and we're talking. And I said, are you hungry? She said, she stopped doing everything that she was doing. She was like, yes, I'm hungry. And I said, I have snacks in my car. You want to go get in my car? She was like, sure. So she gets into the car. I give her some snacks. It's not the like Doritos or some bad chips. I give like healthy snacks. And so I put the healthy snacks in her hand, and she's like, I don't like these. These are healthy snacks. I was like, well, you in the car already. And I shut the door. And so we laugh about it. And then she was like, yeah, you got me because I don't like this stuff. And I end up taking her to a ER because of the possible contusions that they believed that she had. And so I was able to get everything that I needed from her for the most part through our interaction because I connected with her and I knew that she needed some food and I could talk to her on that level. I was able to get her in the car in 5 minutes from me arriving on location, where it was 45 minutes of them not being able to get her in the car. The TBRI skills that I have, I use those very quickly. And like I said before, I didn't think that it can work in such a quick manner, but the two of the principles, two of the cornerstones of TBRI, it worked for me. And I got her in the car, and then I can go back to the playful engagement, and it helped make the situation better. So I'll let Randy say his part.
So a little bit about the playful engagement. So that's a tough word for me because I'm not a playful person. So I was always resistant to that concept of like, we don't have time to play. I just need to get this stuff done and let's move on. But what's important to remember about that is when someone is in the act of playing, they're laughing, that mental state, it's good because it disables fear. Like it helps them not be fearful. So if that playful engagement is really centered around to disengage any kind of fear about the situation this kid or person might be in. And so it's so helpful. I'm not good at it, but it's so helpful when it comes to working with someone that is in survival mode in that downstairs brain, amygdala, as we talked a little bit about earlier, that ability to like disengage that fight, flight, or freeze is what Theo did. Just by connecting and being playful with this child, it allowed her to get in the car and refocus on something different. And so it's a great strategy. I'll share two real quick stories, and it has to do with young girls that we recovered as far as being trafficked, and how after 2020, my focus was all about connecting with these young kids as opposed to just prosecuting everybody or just getting them out of my hair. One of the young girls, the locals had been working with her for many years prior to me getting back to this duty station, and they had all given up hope. They even told me, we've given up on this girl. She's just a troublemaker. She's never gonna mount to anything. She's on methamphetamines. She's running off with boys. She's going to San Antonio getting trafficked. And I get it. She definitely was a trouble for the police. And so when I first met her, she didn't even want to interview me because I looked like one of the guys that had sexually assaulted her. So I couldn't even do the initial interview. I had to let my partner do the initial interview because she could not stand to be in my sight. And so fast forward years later, where I'm working with her, she's continually running away. She's having a lot of problems at home, all of these different things. We're recovering her probably 3 or 4 times. We finally get her home. She's got some charges against her, so she's dealing with that. She had fought her mom and dad, and so she had some charges pending there. I would go visit her at the jail regularly just to sit down and visit with her, just building that connection. We weren't talking about who trafficked her. We weren't talking about the drugs she used. We were just getting to know each other. And then when she got out of jail, she had my number and she would call me regularly. And I know this is sometimes we feel like this is just outside of our scope, but she would call me regularly and she would be high on meth and she would just need someone to talk to. I would drive over. She's in the town next to me. I'd let her get in my unmarked unit and we would just sit there and talk. She hadn't bathed in weeks. She was just a mess, but we would just sit in the car and talk. We would just visit. Hey, what do you need? How are you doing? Whatever. She's strung out on methamphetamine. I knew all of this. I didn't go and arrest her for all that. I just was like, man, she just needs a connection, a healthy connection piece. And so that story ended up, obviously she's still having issues and she's going to struggle for a while, but she called me about a year ago and wanted me to officiate her wedding. She got married And she said that you made such an impact in my life, just being that constant in my life. Like, would you officiate my wedding for me? And I did. Now, is she going off to be a doctor and happily ever after? No, she's still having a lot of struggles. She's still a little bit in survival mode. But that connection piece is what changed, right? Is I didn't do anything magical. I just focused more on the connection piece. And then fairly recently, another young girl ran away from my hometown. We picked her up out of Houston. I traveled back. I drove her back from Houston to a rehab center. We talked for about 3 hours. We didn't talk about trafficking. We didn't talk about what she was up to up there. Didn't tell her how stupid she was for running away. All we did was get to know each other. And took her to rehab. She ran away a few more times. We finally got her placed out of state so we could get her away from her environment. And I wasn't able to take her on that trip, but I called her. And the first thing this young girl says to me was, I really miss you. I've only spent maybe 3.5 hours with this young kid. And first thing she tells me is she misses me like we were best buds, growing up. And what I realized through that is the positive and healthy impact each of us can have on these young kids' life that come from just a heavy background of trauma is so instrumental in getting them to drive forward to healing. And so those are a couple of real life stories of how, when I learned about TBRI and kind of trauma informed and understanding and having empathy for these young kids, I realized the impact that I truly can make, as opposed to just throwing them in the car as Theo, the other officers were doing. And they weren't doing anything wrong. They didn't know, what they didn't know, they don't know. So it's not to say that everybody's doing things wrong. It's just trying to teach everybody there might be a little bit better way to do it.
That's great, Randy. Thank you. And yeah, I think trauma-informed care makes such a big impact because it tends to be a very rare way. Kids don't feel treated that way often. And so I think it says a lot that, the impact that you made, even in just a few hours, that obviously stood out. So I think what we will do is maybe combine our last two questions, because I know you guys really wanted to get to our last question, which is if you could suggest one small step towards implementation today, what would that be? If you want to kind of combine the fourth question with your answer, which was about the barriers in law enforcement to trauma-informed care, but just for the sake of time, we might need to combine those two. Sue, do you want to go first?
Sure. I'll talk about small steps toward implementation. And I think this builds on what Randy and Theo were just talking about building connection and building rapport, right? We were talking about this the other day that, okay, so how do you just build rapport with people, right? Like, what do you do to build rapport? And Theo and I were just in a presentation this morning where it was about clinicians building rapport with the clients that they see. And it's all the same thing, right? It's about talking to people with respect and trying to find something in common with them. So I think finding something in common is like really the first step with all of this, whether or not it's, with a client or with anybody, but just thinking of something to talk about with them that they can talk about. So for example, I had a client come in a couple of weeks ago. She had moved here actually from Illinois, and she came down with her boyfriend and her 3 kids. And the boyfriend went back. He went back to Illinois and he left her here in Texas where she didn't know anybody. And so they found her in the car. She had been drinking. She was passed out, and the kids were all with her. The oldest one was 7. So they were 7, 6, and 2-year-old. And they were just there by this car, and she was passed out in the car. So they took the kids into CPS custody. And so then she comes to court, and the court orders that she has to come and see me. So she comes to see me, and, we're at a government building. We have the 2-way mirror, so I think it's pretty intimidating to come here. And sometimes people don't know why they're here. So just talking about, what we do here and just trying to build that connection. So I knew that she was from Illinois. I was from Illinois. So I just went with that to start with, and found out that we had lived in the same town. I asked her what school she went to and things like that. And then I think it just kind of builds that relationship pretty quickly. It just really builds that trust. So the strategies that we use to talk to parents or to talk to clients, whether it's verbally or non-verbally, those things are really important. Body language, eye contact, the tone of our voice really matters. And so we can teach that to other people so that they can do that as well. Healthy touch. There's a lot of things that we can do to just build that relationship with people. And it just builds it a lot quicker if they really trust us from the get-go.
Okay, I'll go next. So when we talk about barriers in law enforcement, a lot of times when you're on patrol, you got to get through with this one so you can go to the next one. Now we are very short-staffed, I would assume nationwide. And our agency, we are overwhelmed with calls and we have forced overtime every day. And so some of the things that we are doing are trying to meet the quantity of people, but we're not giving them the quality of our service. And so the quality of our service may take 10 extra minutes with someone, 30 extra minutes with someone, and provide them with the resources that they need, give them that ear to just sound off about whatever the issue is. And if we do that, we can give a better level of care to them. And when we give a better level of care, we have now given them time that some people do need, the resources that others may have needed. Maybe they didn't know that the Mental Health Authority provides free counseling for their kids or free counseling for themselves. And then the basis of what I would like to say that TBRI is treating people like the family members who you love. And so that's big because we are all in law enforcement, a ultimate customer service role. Our customer service can go great or it can go bad. And if it go bad, somebody may end up not having their life. And I hold that dear to my heart because my family members that I love, they go out and they have interactions with law enforcement. And having those interactions with law enforcement, they may be scared that they won't go home every day. And so when you treat people like the family members that you love, you will go the extra mile for your family member that you love. You will listen to them. You will allow them a little grace in what they're doing. Long as it is not dangerous, you will, like I said, give them that grace. And if you don't want to treat people like the family members that you love, I implore you to think about the last time your county, city, or whatever agency was sued because you made a bad decision. And so if you treat them like the family members that you love, those bad decisions won't be there all the time. We had a big thing about getting raises here, but our county paid out in over $5 million in settlements because we made bad choices while we were giving customer service to people. And so if we could have just made a better choice and treated that person a little bit better or thought about the situation because we didn't think they were traumatized or we don't care about their trauma, we may have been able to provide them with the time and the resources that they needed for that day and that time, and we didn't end up in a lawsuit and we have to go get a lawyer, go get CLE, go get TNPA, and go find out if I'm gonna be able to keep my job and worry about prison time, all of those things. If we just try to slow things down and treat them like the family members that we love.
How much time do I have, Kim?
Let's do
30
1
seconds?
minute.
30
Yeah.
seconds. All right. So real quick, I threw it in the chat, guys. I threw it in the chat. Some nonverbal engagement strategies and some verbal engagement strategies. And I wanted to share those with you because it's so important that we leave you with something to try. Like, how do we do this? What do we do? And so the verbal engagement strategies comes from Negotiations, a book by Chris Voss or Gary Nesner. Anybody in the negotiation world. I've been in the negotiation world since 2014. So I've developed some verbal engagement strategies. In law enforcement, we often call it verbal judo or something of that nature. But so these strategies really, really work. And then the nonverbal engagement strategies, I put in there a few. That's from the TBRI concepts. The idea of we want eye contact. We don't force eye contact. So it's not, hey, look at me. It's, hey, you know, kind of trying to get that eye contact, but never force it. And then the healthy touch obviously is important. Touch is a connecting piece, but it needs to be healthy and at the appropriate time, obviously, and be appropriate. Voice tone is super important. And then behavior mirroring. If the child is much shorter than you, it'd be much better for you to sit at that child's level than to stand over the top of them and look like their boss or like their dominant force, right? And so these are just some things that you want to implement, and you'll see they'll work at home. I use these on my kids. They work at home. And then the biggest barrier that I always run into with law enforcement is this. We think that this is huggy, touchy, feely stuff, and it's not at all. It's appropriate touch, right? It's appropriate timing for all of this stuff, but it does work. And so I think we've got to get out of the mindset that this is making us weak or making us, you know, not have authority. It's just not true. That's maybe a minute and 2 seconds, I think.
No, that was great. That was a great way to wrap it up also. And just a reminder, if anyone has questions, if you'll go ahead and put those in the chat. We do plan to wrap everything up right at 1 o'clock to be respectful of everyone's time, but our panelists have agreed to stick around for a few minutes afterwards, and so they can address some of those questions. Like I said, this was an introduction to trauma-informed care. We covered a lot of material in a short amount of time. We want to provide you guys, our panelists have all agreed to provide their contact information for you. So there's a couple slides here if you want to screenshot those. Also, we can share the slides with everyone so you have these resources moving forward. But thank you guys for being so willing to share your experiences. We really, really appreciate it. As far as ways to stay connected, both Randy and I have kind of ongoing services to continue training and educating law enforcement in trauma-informed care. And we are not competitive about that. We are both just very passionate about trauma-informed care. And so any way that we can get that out and get connected and start conversations, we are more than willing to do that. And so here is our information on that as well. The last slide has just a couple more resources as far as, you know, there's a lot of rabbit trails that you can go down reading, and these are just a few of my favorite sites, and they'll lead you to other things too, just kind of understanding that, you know, this really is science-based information, and so is super helpful. Let's see, Madeline, do we have any questions in the chat?
No, no questions yet. Yeah, no questions.
Okay. I will, do any of our panelists want to say a few final statements? We have about 4 minutes until we're closing out.
Sure. So I'll interject a little bit more. When we started TBRI and we started talking and we got in contact with Randy and Dr. Cross, I was still apprehensive. I'm the iron fist at home. I'm the iron fist at work. I'm about a book. Like, this is what we gonna do. And I'm from the old school where we say we gonna ask them to do it, then we gonna tell them to do it, and then we gonna show them how we wanted it done. And so in that, we had a lot of incidents where people have to go take a urinalysis because we are now involved in a use of force, things like that. And I don't have that issue anymore. I don't have the uses of force that I used to have prior to 9 years ago. 9 years ago, when I started mental health, those uses of force went down a lot, but I can count on my two hands the amount of times that I handcuff people, and I take many people to the mental health hospital. Every year, I was taking at least 700 people to the mental health hospital. And so with that, I was handcuffing maybe 8 or 9 of them a year. And so using this skill set that I have, it drastically allowed me to do less paperwork. It allowed me to get the job done with less stress. And I implore you all to, if you're in law enforcement and if you have that ability, to try to learn TBRI and learn about trauma, because somebody can benefit from it. And you can also benefit from being a supervisor who understands trauma, because your employees may have trauma. Your employees will bring trauma into the workplace, and you'll be able to handle those traumas better for your employees and keep your employees. Your retention at your job will go up, because people will not want to leave because they say, hey, this is a great job and I love this job. And so in law enforcement, if the county or the city or whatever next to yours is paying more money, you're losing employees left and right. And so if you have a better supervision grasp on TBRI or trauma, you will be able to supervise them at a better rate and keep those employees that are good.
I'm going to add one thing to that. So important to remember, kids with unresolved trauma become adults with unresolved trauma. And so that cycle really, really needs to be broken. And if it's not you, then who, right? Who's going to do it? Like it's our chance to break some of these cycles for our communities, right? And to allow these young kids to have that fighting chance, those paces, right? We get them, maybe they've never had a really good family figure or father figure or mother figure. It's our opportunity to input just a little bit of that for any kid that you come across. Because at the end of the day, like I tell people all the time, those kids that are full of trauma become adults that are full of trauma. And guess who I get to deal with is the adults with full of trauma when they get older, right? They're the ones that the police are called on. And so if we can kind of break some of those cycles early on, I think we can actually make an impact. And being in a service industry, I think that's something that we should really press and look forward to doing in our careers.
Thank you guys so much. And thank you to everyone for being here today. We really appreciate it. Like I said, this is just the tip of the iceberg of this conversation. And so if you're interested in more, please reach out. Also, we will stay on for a few more minutes if anyone wants to stay on and ask our panelists any questions. But other than that, thank you all and have a great day.
And Kim, it looks like Veronica Flores did ask in the chat if you offer in-person trainings for large groups. I think that might be general to you and Randy.
Yes, I do. Randy, I believe you do as well, right?
Yep. And me and Kim are looking to collaborate in the future for these things. So as you guys reach out to either one of us, and I'm sure the other one would be involved for future training. So Theo, Sue, we all have been training over the last year or so, doing different trainings. So I think all of us would be willing to be involved if possible in any type of additional trainings for sure.
And if anyone still on wants to ask their questions verbally, you should be able to unmute yourself if you prefer to ask a question that way.
Hey y'all, I have a quick question for y'all. First, thank y'all so much for coming in. I've been looking forward to this conversation, hearing from law enforcement, and just one of my best friends is also in law enforcement, and we have some pretty spirited conversations, just because I understand the position that you all are in law enforcement. I'm very empathetic in that regard. But my question to y'all, thinking about the barriers to the work within law enforcement and the culture, it makes me wonder. First, I always wanted to know, is there this myth? There's this myth with this quota thing where and I'm sure y'all have heard, like, people on the outside of law enforcement thinking that, police officers have to, show so many arrests as if they're like doing their job or something, which I always wanted to know, is that a real thing first and foremost? Or is it okay to not to do the work the way that y'all have been doing it? And as you mentioned, Deputy Deaver, your numbers have went severely decreased because of how you're approaching the work now. Is there ever flack from the traditional law enforcement attitude when they see that happening?
So to answer the first question, no quota. They do try to make you show that you done something at work. So they want some kind of actions. Like you can't just come to work and be quiet for 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours and go home. And like you need some type of productivity. And so that productivity could be traffic stops, answering calls for service, like somebody broke into my car, somebody ran into my car, whatever it is, those calls for services. And then the second part of the second question was the 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 numbers. So I still take people to mental health hospitals, but I don't handcuff them at a high rate. I I really never did, but the amount of people that I have handcuffed has gone down even more. Uh, my job is different from a patrol officer's job because I come in as a secondary unit. For example, if somebody had a car wreck and in the car wreck, the person who was at fault says, "Hey, I thought they were demons inside, so I was trying to use my car to relieve the demons from their car to save them." So they will call me. I will come onto the scene and I will assess them or have them assessed by our mental health authority. And then if it is, in fact, they are in a mental health crisis because they are a danger to others, uh, then I would take them to the mental hospital. So me taking more time to talk to them and allowing them a chance to be a human and get the help that they need, I am able to get them in my unit without putting handcuffs on them and get them to the mental health hospital without handcuffs. And that happens very often. But now that I know the principles of TBRI, I can articulate these things to others. I can teach you, Mr. Clarence, how to do that. Before, I didn't have a roadmap for it. I was just working my way through it. But now I have a roadmap that I can say, hey, this is how you do it. This is why it's working. These are the things that you can try. And again, everybody won't be the same. Everybody won't just say, hey, Deputy Deaver, let me hop in your car and you're going to do whatever. No, everybody's not going to do that. But uh, because I'm trauma informed, I know like sometimes it won't work for me. Maybe their trauma is a guy that looks like me. So maybe I have to tag in someone else that look like Randy or whoever, whatever other coworker comes into play that they can help this person. And my being being trauma informed allows me to not put myself up front and think that, oh, if you can't listen to me, then I just need to handcuff you and I don't care. Oh, you can't get to with me. Let me pull somebody else in and let me regulate myself, because once I regulated myself, I'm not taking things personal. I'm not stressing out about how you're acting with me, and I'm leveling the response to the action at that time, and not something that, oh, I know you pissed me off last week and I didn't get you, so I'm gonna get you today, or somebody pissed me off 30 minutes ago, so I'm gonna take it out on you because I can. And so it allows me to always know that this may be my trauma and address my traumas. So I know that might be a longer answer, but yes.
I'll add just one thing to it. The quota thing is kind of cultural, and so not every department, not every area of the state puts so much emphasis on producing a number, whether it's an arrest or tickets. But that it doesn't exist officially, right? It's more of a cultural pressure, like, making a competition between officers of like who can go get more arrests or who can go. So that's more of a cultural thing. There's no official like quotas, because actually it's illegal to set quotas for law enforcement, but they get around it by just making competitive cultures. And so it does exist to the degree of, depending on that culture and where you're at in Texas, it might be a lot more pressure to go out and get numbers. And that does create a barrier right across the state to let those numbers drop. Because once we get a certain amount of numbers, that's the hard part. Like once you have 50 arrests in the year, if you only have 10, by just the nature of numbers, they're going to go, well, you weren't doing anything. And so that is a barrier. You're correct in the sense that that is a barrier, because if Randy goes out and really is on fire and does a bunch of stuff, and then the next year I'm focused a little more on the victim and trying to just get them healthy, and then I don't really have the numbers or the metrics that they're looking for, they're probably going to ask some questions. They're going to say, someone really high up is going to go, what's going on with Randy? Theo's in a great situation to where he has very supported supervisors and their approach is very different. But I think you're correct in that is one of the big barriers. We've got to get out of the mindset culturally that it's all about how many people can we put in jail, because it's just not an effective strategy. Like we know that through the data, it's not effective to just throw everybody in jail. And so changing that mindset will be part of this too, is trying to really get people to understand that are we going to rehab everybody right now at this moment? No, but just slamming somebody into jail doesn't necessarily solve the problem either. So yep, I like the question. It's a good question, and it's a fiery debate. Fiery debate.
Thanks for that question, Teddy. Teddy is one of our Step Up directors. So,
okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
He's on the restorative practices side, but obviously he knows trauma-informed care too. Anyone else on the call have a question? I think we have a few people.
Still on.
Okay.
Don't be scared.
I gotta run, y'all, but thanks again for everything that y'all are doing. I truly feel like, especially the two of you are in such a very impactful position. Very often, trying to, our officers taking the mindset that y'all have learned and take is it's just super powerful to me, and I just appreciate it. The more that we can get the word spread out to everyone, everybody's going to benefit. So thanks again, guys. And Kim, thanks for putting it together. Y'all be well and be safe.
Yep.
Thanks, Teddy.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I think that will do it. I will plan to send out the PowerPoint, and then I guess the recording. Madeline, can we attach the recording to an email, or is that going to be too big of a file?
I can try.
Maybe a link.
Yeah, maybe a link. We can figure it out.
Okay, yeah, that's one part I hadn't thought through.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I'll go ahead and stop sharing my screen, stop the
Okay.
recording. I did just want to make sure and give space for Brandy and Robin. Okay, Brandy just hopped off.
Yep.
I don't know if Robin had any questions. I feel like we're similar. She might have just wanted to stay in and listen to what other people's asked. But all right, gone.
Oh, Madeline, you know me so well. Just geeking out over here. I love this stuff. Thanks, y'all. I appreciate your